been host to a number of extraordinary speakers. It's my pleasure this afternoon to add General James Matthis to that distinguished list. For more than 30 years, General Matthis has had a front row seat for some of the defining moments in the United States' relationships with the countries and governments of the Middle East. A distinguished war veteran, Governor Matthis saw ground combat as he commanded troops in Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm and provided key leadership for Operation Enduring Freedom in southern Afghanistan and Operation Iraqi Freedom. But it takes more than combat experience to be a military leader. It also takes intellectual agility and a keen understanding of the interplay between conflict and diplomacy. For these reasons, General Matthis was named Commander of the U.S. Central Command in 2010. He is credited with redefining how the U.S. military combats complicated counterinsurgencies and with understanding and maximizing the vital roles of coalitions and partnerships in establishing productive relationships within volatile situations. General Matthis is a brilliant military tactician and respected peacekeeper who every day lives his motto, no worse enemy, no better friend. We're thrilled to have him here today to learn more about the Middle East and U.S. relationships in that region of the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming General James Matthis to the University of Wyoming.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having me here today. I consider it a real privilege to come out here. I'm from the West, and some time ago I was talking to my brother, my older brother, who used to beat me up when I was 10 years old, and he said, "Why do you always give all your speeches in Washington, D.C. and New York? Why don't you come out to the real America?" That's a great point, and not wanting to get beat up again, I decided I would see if I could do so. And so here I am today. Here in Laramie on a beautiful Wyoming day, and I'm very, very happy to be here. I feel at home out here in the West, and I'm very happy to see the veterans here. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't forget my debts to each one of you, and certainly the soldiers from the Wyoming National Guard, the airmen from F.E. Warren, the Army and Air Force, our OTC students here. It's really a pleasure to see all of you continuing to sign on with this protection mission of the best experiment in the world, an experiment you and I call America. I would tell you too that as a Westerner, I've always thought that when I'm out here, I draw a lot more energy from the landforms, from the trees, from the mountains, and certainly from the history. And when you think of Lieutenant Casper of the U.S. Army and Chief Washaki, the kind of warriors they were during those triumphs and tragedies of the Western Plains and the high country here, that still resonates today, ladies and gentlemen. It still resonates down through the ranks of the military today as warriors that came out of this tradition continue in the finest traditions all around the world. I'm also proud to be in Wyoming because I'm one of those who recognizes what this state stands for. Long before equality was anything more than a word, long before equality was cool, this was a state that was leading by example. And you all know why you're also known as the equality state among the people who studied American history. And I'll touch on what happens when women first get a chance at leadership roles a little later in my remarks. But as we look at you having the first appointed Justice of the Peace, you have the first governor who's female, I think it's a nice reminder to people that this is a country that takes chances on leaders, and it's always proven the right thing to do when we continue to take those chances. I would tell you too that in talks like this, I prefer to talk for just long enough to close some of the distance between me and you, throw out some nuggets, hopefully something you can use. Better yet, find something there that you might be able to challenge me on, because I'd like to save a fair amount of time, a lot of the time, for the best part, which is always the Q&A, where you're talking to me about what's on your mind. I would tell you, too, that I love coming to schools, to college campuses, and one of the reasons I do, I spent my 40-odd years in uniform in the Marine Infantry. And being around young people is often where I get my inspiration. I would tell you, too, that the infantry, just for those of you who don't know where those words come from, infant soldier, young soldier, infantry, that's where those words originated. And today I'm reminded as I wander around the Middle East and I see our young soldiers, sailors, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, Marines, not just from America, but from all the countries fighting together, that it's often on the shoulders of our youth that so many of our folks ride. Our military today, I would tell you, is a national treasure. Now, you're going to read some things and it's straining and this sort of thing, but it's not straining in terms of its spirit. Certainly, it's been a tough 10 years, more than 10 years of war, but right now, we are the envy of almost every nation in the world. And probably, if the truth be known, even our enemies envy America for its military. It's not because of our equipment. A lot of nations have good military equipment. That's not unique to us, even though ours is some of the best. Rather, it's the selflessness, it's the skill, and certainly it's the ethical moorings that bring us our reputation around the world. We're only as good as the people who join, and like the veterans here in your midst, you see many of them who have put in their time carrying the Patriots' burden, and they're young patriots who look beyond the hot political rhetoric that you and I hear every day about these very difficult to understand wars, and with the high quality of their character, with their unselfishness, with their ethical approach, people who are honest about their mistakes. We do believe we're the good guys, we're not the perfect guys. When you put all this together, we remind you, the world, that the Americans can be the most generous friends, the most generous people anywhere in the world. But if we're attacked, we can be fearsome, even if ethical warriors. And you need to look no further than 9/11, when a bunch of maniacs thought that by attacking our country and hurting us, they could scare us. Well, we don't scare. And so we have also had to teach that lesson once again, that we may be very practiced in our politics, we may be very loud-mouthed with one another as we talk about what's right and what's wrong and that sort of thing. But when it comes down to defending this experiment, America, we're quite willing to step forward, all of us, and do so. I would tell you, too, that this is the first war, ladies and gentlemen, since our revolution that our country has fought, at least long war like this, international war overseas, that we have fought using all volunteers. And that is really remarkable when you think of the spirit of the revolution that established this country under George Washington, that spirit still rides. And today, all volunteers, no draftees, we continue to fight this very difficult and what has been a very difficult war for us, with young folks who continue, like here in the audience today, to sign up. I'm the U.S. military commander responsible for the Central region. And let me give you an idea of where that region is first. If you go to the Eastern Mediterranean and you look at Lebanon, that's one of the countries I'm responsible for. Drop down to Egypt in North Africa. Come over to the Arabian Peninsula from Jordan down to Yemen, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran. Go on over into Afghanistan and Pakistan, and then go up into Central Asia and Siberia with Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, all the way up into, well into Siberia and Kazakhstan. So that's the area that I'm responsible for. And so you may wonder, well, what are the guiding principles? What do you do in that area that keeps your military as a contributing force to peace? Because let me tell you, you're going to see a lot of mission statements when you get out of this college, my fine young students, and they'll say what your corporation or your military unit's mission is. And you'll see one that says, I'm responsible for military operations, I'm responsible for ensuring the president has military options should he need them. But my real job is to try to help keep the peace, or what's passed for peace in the Middle East, for one more year, one more month, one more week, one more day, one more hour, one more minute, while our diplomats try to find diplomatic solutions to some some rather vexing problems. The framework is fourfold that I operate within. First, the U.S. military supports our Department of State in its support for each country's political reform. Each country's political reform so that they continue to meet the needs of their own people. The second framing principle is that we support economic modernization because more of those countries out there need to have everybody achieve some degree of satisfaction from the economic situation so they feel some ownership of their own future and not just seeing that they're poor and downtrodden and there's no hope, and so they might as well turn to terrorism or some other nutcase idea because they just don't have anywhere else to turn. Third, we support a renewed, re-energized Middle East peace process between the Palestinians and the Israelis. The status quo, ladies and gentlemen, is not sustainable, and our generation needs to try and solve this, not turn it over to the next generation. And we stand firmly behind the two-state solution that Republican and Democratic administrations have tried to bring about in the Middle East so the Palestinian people have a homeland of their own. Finally, and this isn't where I support so much our foreign policy as I represented it, we ensure that our friends and partners in the region sense that they have an ally, they have a friend they can count on when it comes down to any terrorist activity, which you read about, I know, frequently coming out of the region I'm responsible for, and certainly to stand by them should any nation try to invade them. And frankly, there's only one country in my entire region that has any anticipation of that sort of thing, and that is Iran. So my military role is nested inside the broader role run by Secretary Clinton and President Obama, the Commander-in-Chief. In the Middle East, it's a revolutionary time, and it's never going to go back to what it once was. That will never happen again. It's the Arab awakening is going to have to be accepted for what it is. You'll read about it at times. It's rather complex, because if you go back to that first framing principle I mentioned, every country has its own history, its own religion, its own tribal or political makeup, and you can't have a template that says every country is going to go forward with this Arab awakening in a certain direction. They're as different from each other, even if they live next to each other, as we are from Mexico or as we are from Cuba. If you look at the French Revolution of 1798, or 1789, just substitute the word Cairo for Paris, and you can get a pretty good feel for what's going on. It was not necessarily a pell-mell rush in the Middle East for democracy. You and I may hope it turns out that way, but the fact is, it was a bunch of people who were fed up with unjust and unresponsive government. So what we need are fresh ideas, and frankly, I've served out in this region since 1979, and that's where you young people come in, who can bring fresh ideas for how we relate to this part of the world. We need young folks today who come in, who have disciplined but unregimented ideas, who can take things for what they really are and not necessarily get afraid of the changes that are underway out there. Those of us who've been somewhat fortunate in our chosen line of work, and we've been somewhat successful, we owe it to you to kind of run the elevator down and tell you the lessons we've learned in the midst of the chaos that passes for my region. Excuse me. I was called some years ago by the Secretary General of NATO. I was in Kabul at the time, and he said, "Congratulations, you're going to become the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO for transformation." I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. So I said, I better go study this a little bit. And I learned something in my study for that job that I will pass on to you. And it's that surprise is going to forever be your companion. If you go into anything more than a very limited world where you try to control everything that's going on, you're going to be subject to surprise. And let me give you an example of it. I used to have a job when I was there working for NATO. I had an office also in the United States. And it was right next to the Potomac River. And if 200 years ago, say in 1812, sitting in that room with a bunch of people who had written the Constitution. They fought the Redcoats, an army that humbled Napoleon, and they'd beaten him with French help. And you're sitting there saying, I wonder where we're going to fight next. Not one person in the room, very bright people that wrote a Constitution you and I are proud of to this day, not one of them anticipated that the Royal Navy would sail right up the river outside my window and burn Washington, D.C. to the ground a few years later. Not one recognized it. And you can dismiss that and say, well, they were old-time folks. In modern day, we don't get as surprised as that. Well, go back 100 years, and you're sitting in Wyoming, now 1912. The last Indian uprising was in eastern Oregon 10 years ago, and the U.S. Army is spreading forts across the West. And so I said, I wonder where we're going to fight the next 10 years. If someone had said, I think we'll send 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 men to Europe, where they'll use machine guns and airplanes overhead will drop bombs and we'll have men wearing gas masks, they would have been laughed out of the room. That's not going to happen. Look around Wyoming, that's just not going to happen. Well, you say, well, that's still kind of old-fashioned. Let's go back 11 years. I'm the senior military assistant to the Deputy Secretary of Defense. A new administration has come in, and a young officer was giving a presentation to Secretary Rumsfeld and to Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz, and he was getting peppered with questions. Why do we need a military? When are we going to ever fight in that part of the world? And this sort of thing. Where do you think we're going to fight next? And finally, the young officer, very exasperated, said, Mr. Secretary, I don't know where we're going to fight, but I'll tell you one place we won't fight. Put his hand up on a map. He put his hand up over Central Lake. This was in June of 2001. 6 months later, I was shivering in the Hindu Kush, a surprise once again. Now, I only give you these examples, ladies and gentlemen, because the only way you can prepare for a world like that is to be educated enough to take these kind of surprises when they come, because it will be your constant companion surprise, and take them in stride. And I would tell you that we're entering a new era when America, for fiscal reasons, and because many of our people simply don't want to be the world policeman anymore, is going to have to reconsider how we relate to the world. America's always had two fundamental strengths. One, it has the power of inspiration. The other, it has the power of intimidation. If you come after us at Pearl Harbor, if you decide to invade Kuwait, then we'll come after you. So there was always intimidation there. But sometimes we may forget we also have the power to inspire. And I think that alongside foreign forces, and I've always fought alongside foreign forces, I've fought many times, I have never been in a position to really understand how much other countries are inspired by us. It's hard when you're an American to understand this. I'll give you an example. Right now, there's a little country in my region called United Arab Emirates. It sits right on the Persian or the Arab Gulf. They are probably a leading candidate to be attacked if Iran gets uppity. And United Arab Emirates has been with us in Bosnia and in Kosovo, in Libya and Iraq. They're in Afghanistan alongside us right now. That country is not there because we intimidate them. They're there by choice because we inspire them and they believe in us. And there are many, many countries like that in my region. For example, right now in Afghanistan, in this very difficult to explain war, we right now have the largest wartime coalition in modern world history, 50 nations fighting alongside each other against this medieval type enemy. And I bring this up because the kind of leadership we need to have from graduates coming out of universities like this has got to be team-building leadership. And let me be more specific. You can't just be willing in today's age to listen to somebody. You're going to have to be willing to be persuaded by somebody who's got a better idea. And sometimes I get American officers into my command, and because we are the best in the world at most things, they forget that not all the good ideas come only from the country with the most aircraft carriers. So education should also humble you a little as you recognize where good ideas come from. And that's everywhere if you have the discipline to really listen to those things. We need young people like you to step forward in service to the country. And I'm not talking just about military service, although certainly that is one of the best ways to measure yourself as a man or woman against some very grim circumstances and find just how strong you are inside. You're going to have to get out there and play every day, because if you don't and just sit on the sidelines and carp about it, then the world's not going to be any better for you. And you don't have to look any further than right here at your own university, where your dean, Dr. Frank Gailey, who earned an award as Guardian of the Grassland. So I got interested in that, and I looked it up on a website, and here's what caught my eye. We had spoke about a partnership he made with the agricultural field, ranchers, people like that. You know, let's be honest here. I come from the West, and I know sometimes when you have the farmers and ranchers, they're in one corner, you got the environmentalists in the other corner, the bell rings, and at 168 pounds, we're in purple trunks, and 172, we're in red trunks, they come out swinging. Remember, the word partnership is what Frank put together here. And I would just tell you that in today's world, collaborative leadership is the only way we get things done. It's probably always been that way, really, for any sustained change. But I would tell you, your job is to bring harmony to your field, whether it be an academic field, an agricultural field, a battlefield. It's how do you bring harmony together? Now, in my line of work, I'm not going to sit up here and give you a kumbaya speech. Certainly it can be a very vicious harmony as we close in on the enemy. That does not mean you divorce yourself of good ideas from other militaries with you, or that you surrender your moral point of view. You've got to make sure, too, that you remember that if you get into a scrape, you're going to fall back often on your education. And it took me a long time, I would tell you, to figure out what education meant. I was a lackluster student. I preferred to go hiking, hitchhiking around the West, throwing a football, at times sitting in a classroom. And it took me years of wandering away from school and around the world to find, when I was in Cambodia, really figure out the value of education. I was there right after the fall of Pol Pot and Khmer Rouge. Some of you hopefully are too young, I'm happy to say, to know much about those days. But basically, Pol Pot's crew had murdered a quarter of his country's population in something excuse me, that became known as the killing fields. Over 1 million people died there. As we were going through that country, I was with some UN folks, and they were explaining why Pol Pot, Khmer Rouge had murdered all the teachers. And what we really found out was that teachers are a bigger threat than even a Marine with a rifle to a tyrant that wants to control people's minds. Because once you open a mind with books, with teaching, it's very, very hard to close it. Fast forward to 2001. We'd been hit on 9/11. By late November, I had landed with 1,000 sailors and Marines in southern Afghanistan, and my mission was to move against Kandahar, which was the spiritual home of the Taliban. We went in, it was not a big fight. The ferocity of the Army Special Forces, the Navy SEALs, the Marines, as we closed in, the Taliban faded away at that point, even though they outnumbered us significantly. The folks who had been fighting with us from the Afghan side, the Afghan anti-Taliban fighters, came up and said, we want to open the schools. I said, of course. And they said, well, we want to open the girls' schools. I said, absolutely, no problem. And I knew there had been a problem, because for 5 years, if anybody taught a girl, whether they were male or female teacher, they were subject to being murdered by the Taliban, because the Taliban, again, recognized the danger. If you want to control people, you can't let them get educated, because you can't control them if they're educated and they have courage. And so the day they opened the schools, these grizzled fighters came down to see this. So we went downtown Kandahar, and we knew the Taliban didn't like this idea. They were sulking around and all that sort of thing, trying to give us the evil eye. But the bottom line was, on all the street corners, there were sailors and Marines with automatic weapons and hand grenades hanging off them. And out of these houses walked little boys and girls with white shirts and long skirts, little head stars, little briefcases, little backpacks. They proudly walked down the street. They were so happy to be going to school, something that you and I take for granted, something I had to try to get out of and play truant on more days than you can imagine. But people did walk right by these foreign soldiers standing there because they knew who were the good guys and who were the bad guys. And I don't know how many of us would want to see foreign soldiers standing on the streets of Laramie as our children went to school. And it's the same thing for them. If they trusted us, it says something about America's power to inspire. And so I bring these cases up because, one, to say thank you to the faculty for what you do, and for President Buchanan for 35 years of doing this, but also just to share with you how grateful you really need to be for this opportunity. And I just close because I really want to get to the questions here by telling you something that I went up to Cypress Hill Cemetery to prove it because I wasn't sure when I read it was true, but I read that Jackie Robinson, baseball great, had written his own epitaph. So I was in New York City one day and I went out to Cypress Hill Cemetery, and written on his gravestone is a statement that goes like this: "A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives." And I just encourage all of you to have that kind of impact at home with your families, in your school, in your community, in your country, in the world. And make sure that you don't think that because you're coming from Laramie that somehow that your world is somehow circumscribed and smaller. You come out of this school, this very fine school, with an education. One, maintain that attitude of gratitude for everything you've been given as you move out, and then go out and make a difference. Let me stop there because the best part of this is going to be your questions and answers, and I'll throw it open to you, and let's have at it here.
Thank you for a fascinating glimpse of a very complex set of issues and a very inspirational discussion about issues in the Middle East and Central Asia. The program today includes a question and answer session on a variety of topics relevant to the Middle East. The moderator for this session is Associate Professor of History, Marianne Camp, who specializes in the Middle East. 12 questions were solicited from those submitted by students and faculty. Questions addressing similar topics were combined and may have been edited for length. Now I'll turn it over to General Matthis and Dr. Camp.
I do. Oh, yeah, go ahead. But you please.
Chair around here just a second. If you would go back up there and I'll wait for
All right.
the chair moving to happen. But I'd like to follow up quickly on one of the topics that you just dropped as you were mentioning, starting out your speech. You mentioned the equality state. You said, I'd like to tell you something about women in leadership in the military. And I'd love to hear something about that.
I really meant to focus in on the opportunities young girls will finally have an education, which would open their opportunities. But in the military, I would just tell you it's a meritocracy. And frankly, we're unimpressed by your parents' money or your athletic skills, even although we expect you to be in good shape. What we're interested in are, can you create an environment which takes initiative from your subordinates and allows it to move up and become operative, not suffocated. And let me just warn you about one thing. This goes for women and men. We need both as leaders in our military. And that is, you get bad processes in your organization and you mix those with good people, the bad processes will work 9 out of 10 times. So you've got to look at processes. If you've got frustrated people beneath you as a leader, and just make sure that you see as one of your primary jobs is to make sure the process allows the good ideas to come up. I have 203,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, and Marines. And somewhere out there is every answer I need. And whether or not I can set up the process, the leadership process, to bring those answers up in a timely way is critical. And so all of you, male and female, if you've got ways to improve the processes and allow the initiative of subordinates to blossom, you're welcome in the U.S. military. And if you you like to fight, we got a few of those for you too.
Okay, we're going to start with a question from Peter Calderon, who's a political science major. He says, the term blowback has been used to point to unintended consequences of U.S. actions that generate hostility to the U.S., to U.S. forces, and so forth. Given pervasive anti-American sentiments in the Middle East, the tragic assassination of our ambassador in Libya, and green-on-blue attacks in Afghanistan, what changes in strategy would you encourage that might support our allies while maybe reducing or removing combat troops?
First, I would be, if you're ever given a job, make sure you define what the problem is you're trying to solve right up front. Einstein put it, if I had 60 minutes to save the world, I'd define the problem for 59 minutes, and then I'd save the world in one. On this one, I will tell you that in many, many cases, the anti-Americanism you see is the product as much of media's that has got to sell newspapers, frankly. It's not all what it appears to be. I just mentioned the United Arab Emirates have been with us on 5 campaigns. How many of you knew that? And yet, was there a one American flag burned in UAE on one occasion? You'd have known that. So make sure you look at it and come in touch with reality. On the blowback itself, probably the most important thing is making certain in the Middle East that we move to help solve the Palestine-Israel problem. If we can reduce that, it's not up to us to solve. We're not going to impose a solution here. But if we were to reduce that so that people sensed in America, the fair broker, that we're trying to help, I think it would go a long way toward reducing the boiling cauldron that creates the circumstances that has this kind of blowback coming back. And I do not say that because, as a matter of criticism, President Clinton got Yasser Arafat that close to signing on, and for whatever reason, Yasser Arafat decided not to do so. But it is very important we keep trying because we're the only country trusted enough by both sides to try to bring it together. So that's the source, I think, of a fair amount of blowback, and that would be the strategic choice I would make as we move to make for a better environment.
That's interesting because that was exactly the question and I'll push you a little farther on that. This is a question from Eric Abbey, who is in Global and Area Studies. He says, in what ways, more or less, I'm rewording the question, Eric, in what ways does the close political and military relationship between the U.S. and Israel shape or limit the U.S.'s relations with other countries in the Middle East? Would changing some aspect of that U.S.-Israel relationship change our ability to influence or interact productively with other countries?
It's often brought up. I think that when I'm talking to many of the countries